John was an ordinary, confident man who dreamed of a strong family and love for life. There were always many people around him, but despite all the acquaintances and romantic attempts, he could not find someone with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. At the insistence of a friend, he decided to go to a dating evening, something he usually treated with great skepticism. But that evening, an amazing discovery awaited him. Among the many people with whom he exchanged a few stock phrases, there was she, Lily. A young woman with a gentle smile, she looked modest and confident at the same time. Something in her gaze immediately attracted John. She was not trying to impress anyone, not looking for attention, just being herself. It seemed to John that Lily carried some kind of quiet confidence and warmth that is difficult to find in modern relationships. The conversation with her was surprisingly easy. They both forgot about everything around them and seemed to immediately find a common language. Over the next few months, their relationship developed rapidly. John literally transformed before the eyes of his friends and family. Now he often talked about the future, made plans with Lily, and his family noticed how he became happier and calmer. Lily, for her part, felt safe with John, as if she had found the person with whom she could be honest and open. Their weekends together became a tradition. They spent time together, had picnics, rode bikes, walked in the park, and enjoyed simple moments. Every week, John tried to please her with something special, even if it was just her favorite white flowers. Their friends and family saw that this was true love and encouraged them to make their relationship official. 6 months after they met, John decided to propose. The moment was captured on video, where he is on one knee, holding the ring and looking lovingly at Lily. She, without hesitation, said, "Yes." They began preparing for the wedding, wanting to spend this day modestly but warmly, surrounded by their closest people. The wedding day was a symbol of a new beginning for both of them. Lily wore a white dress. John couldn't take his eyes off her, and it seemed that nothing could ruin their happiness. They exchanged vows, telling each other how long they had been waiting for this moment and how happy they were to be together. Family and friends smiled, seeing how happy they were together. No one could have imagined that Lily had a secret that could ruin this happiness, and that the truth hidden behind all these bright moments would change their lives forever. After a wedding day filled with joy and warmth, John and Lily went on their honeymoon. They chose a cozy resort on the coast where they could relax, enjoy privacy, and finally spend time together without rushing. John was happy and could not imagine that difficult moments were waiting for him ahead, which would jeopardize their whole future. The first few days passed calmly and happily. They walked along the beach, enjoyed romantic dinners, and talked about their plans for the future. John constantly noticed how Lily radiated a special inner warmth, and he was sure that he had found the woman with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. But by the end of the week, he began to notice something strange. At first, these were small details that could easily be attributed to fatigue from the holiday or excitement. Lily, for example, would go into the bathroom and lock herself in there for a long time, doing something with particular care. John thought it was strange, but he chalked it up to a woman's habit of grooming herself. Then, one evening, when they were getting ready for dinner, Lily refused to wear the backless dress that John himself had given her before the trip. She answered his question evasively, citing the fact that she felt uncomfortable in it. John tried to be understanding, but his wariness gradually grew. He also began to notice that Lily avoided discussing certain topics. Every time the conversation turned to children or future plans, she became withdrawn, as if she had something she didn't want to talk about. John thought it might be because of her past, which she mentioned in passing but never went into detail about. It made him a little uneasy, but he decided not to press her, believing that in time she would tell him everything herself. One evening, after a walk along the embankment, John and Lily returned to the hotel. John suggested taking some romantic photos to preserve these moments of happiness. He put on her favorite music and looked at her lovingly through the lens. Lily tried to adopt a relaxed pose, but at some point the tension became obvious. She seemed to freeze and flinch when he tried to hug her. It was strange, and John felt that there was something more behind this reaction than simple fatigue. A few minutes passed in silence, and then Lily excused herself to the bathroom, leaving John puzzled. He wondered what could have alarmed her so, but he could not find any answers. That night, John could not sleep for a long time, wondering what his wife was hiding. His thoughts revolved around many hypotheses, but none seemed plausible. The next morning, John decided to ask Lily directly. At breakfast, he gently but firmly asked her to tell him if there was anything she wanted to share. Lily hesitated, as if she didn't know where to begin. She avoided his gaze, and John felt a sense of unease begin to build inside him, as if something in her demeanor was telling him that the truth might be painful. Gathering her courage, she said, "John, there are some things from my past that I haven't talked about because I was afraid they might affect us." John felt his heart tighten. He was ready to hear her secret, to understand and support her, but something in her voice made him wary. John sat across from Lily, holding back his emotions and bracing himself for something he felt would change everything. Lily took a deep breath and began to speak with difficulty, almost in a whisper. Her hands were clutching her napkin nervously. Her eyes were downcast. It seemed like every cell in her body was resisting what she was about to say. Finally, with a noticeable effort, she said, "John, I have something to tell you that I have kept hidden until now. It has not been easy, and I hope that you would be able to understand." Her voice trembled, and John, sensing her inner tension, held her hand, trying to convey support. "I was born with a different name. I was a different person in the past." Lily paused, taking a breath. John frowned, unsure where she was going with this. "When I was a teenager, I realized that my identity did not match who I was born to be. I began a long journey, both physically and emotionally, to become the person I felt I was inside. This is me now. This is the real me." Lily spoke slowly, afraid of his reaction, holding her breath after each word. At first, John was confused, his mind taking a moment to process her words. "You mean you were a different person? You—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his mind blocking out the realization that was slowly creeping up on him. The realization hit him suddenly, and he pulled away from the table, looking at Lily with shock. His eyes were filled with surprise and shock. He couldn't find the words. Lily, seeing his reaction, recoiled herself, anticipating his judgment. She hung her head, feeling ashamed and afraid of what he would say next. "I wanted to tell you this sooner. I really did, but I was so afraid of losing you," she said, her voice quieter, almost a whisper. John was stunned. All the events of the last few months replayed in his mind with a new perspective. Their first evening together, their romantic walks, their plans for the future, their discussions about children. It seemed as if his whole life had been turned upside down in an instant. He felt betrayed, deceived. The thought throbbed in his head that the man he had fallen so deeply in love with was actually hiding something important from him, something he felt he needed to come clean about before they got married. Unable to bear the silence, John stood up abruptly, his chair crashing to the floor. His voice, usually calm and balanced, trembled with anger. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? How could you hide this from me?" He unleashed a torrent of reproaches on her, not holding back his emotions. Lily tried to explain, but her voice was drowned out by his loud words. She spoke of her pain and fears, of how hard it had been to decide to have the operation, and how much she had to endure to become herself. John, however, did not want to listen. He saw only betrayal before him, and all her explanations seemed to him an attempt to justify a lie. In his eyes it was a deception, a blow that he did not know how to cope with. That night passed in heated arguments and mutual reproaches. Lily tried to tell him that she still loved him, that she was the same woman with whom he had tied his life. But for John, this was an irreparable blow to his trust. It seemed to him that the whole world had collapsed, that the person with whom he had shared all his dreams turned out to be completely different. Bitterness and disappointment settled in his soul. After that night, their relationship began to rapidly deteriorate. John couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that washed over him every time he looked at Lily. Every moment they spent together felt like a deception. Every word she said was a lie. He distanced himself from her, stopped talking to her, and avoided her presence, while anger and a deep sense of resentment grew inside him. Lily, despite her pain, tried everything she could to smooth things over, to give him time and space, but nothing helped. The honeymoon days they had planned to spend in romance and peace turned into a nightmare. John, tormented by his thoughts, could neither sleep nor eat. He felt that he did not know how to cope with this discovery, and he was filled with rage. It seemed to him that his happiness was ruined forever, and this anger found an outlet in fits of rage, quarrels, and mutual accusations. Lily tried to talk to him, to explain her position, telling him about the difficulties she had to endure, about how long it took her to accept herself. She tried to convey to him that her feelings for him were sincere, that she really loved him, and that it was extremely difficult for her to decide to tell him the truth, realizing that she could lose him. But John saw all this as justification and refused to listen. Time after time, their arguments became more and more violent. John accused Lily of ruining his life, of losing the future he dreamed of because of her. He said he would never have entered into a relationship with her if he had known the truth, and his words caused Lily deep pain. Each time she tried to withstand this stream of reproaches, but it was increasingly difficult for her to find the strength. With each passing day, Lily found it increasingly difficult to cope with the intensity of her emotions. She tried to explain to John that her past did not define their present, that she was the person he had spent so much time with, the one he had confessed his love to. But the more she talked, the more he closed himself off. It seemed impossible for him to accept this as a given. All he saw before him was lies and betrayal. One day, after a particularly tense conversation, John couldn't take it anymore and abruptly walked out of their hotel room, slamming the door. He felt he couldn't stay with her any longer, couldn't look at her without anger and disgust. He walked out onto the deserted night beach, trying to find answers to calm his anger, but inside him, the dark, destructive energy only grew stronger. Lily was left alone in their room, her heart broken. She felt like her world was falling apart, that the man she trusted, who felt like family and close to her, was now rejecting her with such cruelty that she could barely bear it. The pain was boiling inside her with every word John said. She felt like her past had become her curse, that everything she had gone through to become who she was now being used against her in the most horrible way. When John returned, his face was stern and grim. Lily, desperate to make amends, began to speak to him again, but he cut her off mid-sentence. Their conversations were no longer calm. They were arguments, full of pain, where every word cut like a knife. John hurled accusations at her, full of hatred, calling her a liar, claiming that she had never had the right to claim his love if she had not been honest from the start. Every time they met now, it was like a fight that neither could win. Lily tried to explain everything, but her words seemed to be drowned in a blank wall of resentment. John was becoming more and more distant. His heart was growing cold, and he was on the verge of a breakdown. Anger was building up inside him, threatening to burst out with destructive force. It all came to a head that evening, when John, on edge, let out his pent-up pain and rage. The day was filled with painful silence and mutual alienation, as if an invisible wall separated them even in the same space. John avoided Lily's gaze, and she, feeling that their relationship was teetering on the edge, tried with all her might to break through his coldness. But by evening the tension had become unbearable. John sat staring out the window, his eyes blank and glassy. He no longer saw the woman he had once loved. Lily had become a symbol of broken hopes and shattered dreams. Anger boiled inside him, but even stronger was the sense of hopelessness that he could not suppress. He felt like a victim, a man betrayed by the person closest to him, and now that anger was building to a dangerous boiling point. Lily, aware that the situation was getting worse, timidly tried to approach him, to try, perhaps for the last time, to explain how she saw and felt everything. She sat down opposite him and in a quiet, almost whispering voice began, "John, I know how you feel. I understand that you are hurt, and I deeply regret not telling you the truth sooner. I just couldn't. I was afraid that I would lose you. You were the person who accepted me, and I felt happy at last." But her words did not reach him. John listened to her, but he could no longer take in her explanations. It seemed to him that everything she said was just excuses that only increased his hatred. Finally, he could not bear it any longer and, without holding back, said, "You ruined my life, Lily. You robbed me of my choice, robbed me of my honesty, and now you sit here and try to justify yourself." His voice was cold and harsh, filled with deep contempt. Lily felt her heart clench in pain. She tried to bear his words, but each one of them penetrated deep inside, destroying the last of her confidence and hope. She was silent, barely holding back tears, but she continued to speak, begging him to listen. "John, please understand. This is not a lie. I am me. Everything that happened between us, it was real. I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth because I was afraid that you wouldn't understand. But my love for you was true, and I hoped that this would be the most important thing to you." The words had the effect of pouring oil on a fire in John. His anger exploded. "True? True? You have no right to talk about love when all you've done is deceive me. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth right away. You left me no choice." His voice broke and he slammed his fist on the table. Lily recoiled in fear, feeling his hatred like physical pain. Silence fell. There seemed to be no air left in the room. The tension was unbearable. John stood up and began to pace the room nervously, not knowing how to express the whirlwind of emotions that raged inside him. Lily remained seated, her gaze fixed on the void. At that moment she realized that their relationship, their love, was destroyed to the ground, that it was impossible to return to the past. At one point John stopped, his eyes full of determination and anger. "I can't live with this, Lily. I can't live with what you've done. You took my dream, my future. You ruined everything. I hate you," he said quietly but firmly. And these words finally broke Lily. She grabbed her face with her hands and began to cry, realizing that she could no longer change anything. In utter despair, John left the room, leaving Lily alone with her pain. A dark feeling grew within him, a feeling that only despair and anger remained in his life. After John left the room, Lily was left in silence. The silence was deafening. Tears streamed down her face, and she couldn't help but feel empty inside. It felt like her whole world, everything she had built with love and hope, had been destroyed in an instant. She sat alone, realizing that despite all her attempts to explain and understand, she had lost John forever. Every word he had said echoed in her head, and the pain grew stronger with each passing minute. Meanwhile, John went outside and into the nearest bar. He was looking for a way to drown out his pain and distract himself from the thought that his life would never be the same again. He couldn't get rid of Lily's image, her words and attempts to justify herself. Anger and resentment pushed him to self-destruction, but he didn't know how to cope with these emotions. He spent the whole evening at the bar, lost in his thoughts, not noticing anyone around him. Returning to the hotel late that night, John saw the light in their room and felt a flash of irritation. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear more excuses. In his head, clouded by alcohol and anger, there was a growing desire to end this once and for all, to put an end to the pain that was eating away at him from the inside. He abruptly opened the door, his steps heavy and sharp. Lily, who had almost fallen asleep, looked up and saw him. His face was distorted with rage and pain. His eyes were burning with anger. She knew immediately that something was wrong. "John, what happened?" she asked quietly, holding back the fear that came over her at the sight of his expression. John stepped closer to her, his voice icy. "You ruined my life, Lily. You took away everything that was important to me. Do you think I can just forget about it? Pretend it never happened?" His words were full of hatred, and Lily felt her heart squeeze with fear and helplessness. She tried to get up to leave, but John blocked her way. His hands clenched into fists, and she realized that his anger had crossed the line of no return. At that moment, John was no longer in control. He walked up to her and grabbed her by the shoulders, his face so close that she could feel his heavy breathing. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. She quietly begged him to calm down, to let her go, but he didn't hear her. John's head was in chaos, his mind clouded by rage and resentment. Suddenly, in a fit of blind anger, he did something that changed everything forever. As silence returned to the room, John realized what had happened. He looked at Lily, her lifeless body before him, and the realization of what he had done began to sink into his consciousness. It was a moment of absolute horror when he realized that he had done something irreparable. His hands were shaking, his heart was beating wildly, and his mind refused to accept reality. That same night, the police came to the hotel after one of the guests heard noise and screams coming from their room. John was arrested. He was in complete shock, as if he did not understand how it all happened. Lily, the woman he loved and planned to build a future with, was no longer in his life, and it was all a result of his uncontrollable anger and resentment. During the interrogation, he sat in a daze, not responding to the questions. His world had collapsed. He realized that he himself had destroyed what he once considered his destiny. His heart was filled with regret, but it was too late to change anything.